Eagles Entertainment.
Welcome, Eagles everywhere, to the Eagles Insider Podcast, presented by Lincoln Financial Group. I'm Eagles Insider Dave Spadaro. Super Bowl 55 is in the books. And now we look ahead. Super Bowl 56, destination Inglewood, California. Every team now in the same boat, eyeing up next February. So that is where the Eagles are in this kind of quiet period, we think, although there are a lot of rumors out there about you-know-who. We're keeping our eyes on them. Nothing, of course, coming from the Eagles, who only a week and a half ago here hired Nick Sirriani as the head coach. Actually, 2 weeks ago. Press conference a week and a half ago. We'll talk about that with the voice of the Eagles Merrill Reese in just a few moments. A bit later in the show, we're going to take a look back and potentially a look ahead. The NovaCare Complex is 20 years old. And for those of you old enough to remember Veterans Stadium and the dingy training facility there, the practice field that was filled with uneven spots and rocks and just ankle-breaking spots, just ugh, in the parking lot at the vet. I'm there. It was fun. It was memorable. It was Philadelphia, but it was time for a new facility. And we'll get the lowdown from team president Don Smolenski, who will also kind of look into the future. Fans at Lincoln Financial Field in 2021? We sure hope so. How about fans for training camp 2021? Hey, everybody, get your vaccine. And then we'll do some talking. Okay, the Eagles, if we want to update some news here, still nothing official on the coaching staff as Sirianni continues to add to that group, and the Eagles going back and looking at the 2020 performance, getting ready for the March 17th free agency period, the start of the 2021 NFL business year. So we'll talk to Don in just a bit here. But first up, let's go with Merrill. Merrill and I have been talking a lot lately, and we've been doing it right here on the Eagles Insider Podcast. And Merrill, of course, was there virtually for the Nick Sirriani press conference, which has gotten a lot of attention. And he's also got some thoughts on what the Eagles might do moving forward. Here it is, the voice of the Eagles, Merrill Reese. Merrill, we've gotten a little taste of Nick Sirriani. I had a chance to interview him. He did the press conference, did a couple of other interviews after that. I think people are talking more about his opening statements than anything else. Merrill, let's begin there. I mean, we've both been through this a lot of times watching press conferences. How ridiculous is it that people would say, yes, no, we like him, we don't like him, based on his performance at a press conference? I'm a little taken aback by that.
Well, I don't think it's unusual, because people do make first impressions, and they do stay with those first impressions until proven otherwise. I mean, we haven't had a chance to see Nick Sirianni yet as a head coach. I personally am optimistic. I've heard a lot of good things about him. I've heard the things that Jeffrey Lurie has reported that he's learned after spending a great deal of time with Nick in the interview process. So I'm encouraged by all of that, but I don't think it's unusual for people to hear somebody make opening statements and meet the media for the first time. It's just part of the world in which we live. And Nick has not been in this position before, and it's not something where he's had a great deal of experience. So you can't expect him to come in with like a coach who has been in this league for 20 years or has been around for a long time, or has previous head coaching experience, and to act like one. But I can tell you that there have been coaches who have wowed us immediately and have crashed and burned in a relatively short amount of time, and other coaches where you have to take a wait-and-see approach, and they've turned out to be very, very good.
I mean, the wait-and-see approach is obviously the direction we're going here. 39-year-old head coach, Merrill, and reportedly has added very young coaching staff around him. To me, this indicates a real, fresh, new direction that the Eagles are taking. I find that interesting that really very few holdover coaches appear to be coming back with the Eagles. I think that's a new day here. It reminds me of Andy Reid and just a whole bunch of coaches that we don't know a ton about.
Well, I don't mean this to sound negative, but it's not like Andy Reid in the sense that when Andy Reid came here, he had two veteran coaches and coordinators' jobs. He had Rod Dowhauer, a former head coach who was well into his 50s at the time as his offensive coordinator, and a gnarled defensive coach who had really been around the block a few dozen times by the name of Jim Johnson to add guidance. In the case of Nick Sirriani, these are young coaches in key roles, guys who are in their 30s. So it's a much different feel. Now, that doesn't mean that it won't work, and it doesn't mean that they won't bring some fresh new ideas, but as you said, it is a different approach.
So, Merrill, what are your early impressions of Nick, and what are some of the things that you've heard that you think will translate to the Philadelphia Eagles in 2021?
Well, I've heard that he's extremely bright, that he's an incredibly hard worker, and that he is a guy who communicates very well with the players and the coaches around him. Again, he's done it as a coordinator before. And another thing that encourages me is that he has gotten an endorsement of somebody of whom I have the highest respect, and that's Frank Reich. So if Frank Reich says this is a guy who will fit into the head coaching mold, who he sees succeeding, that is more than enough for me at this point. He's a guy who has been in a position to evaluate Nick Sirriani. To be honest with you, Dave, until 3 weeks ago, I hadn't even been aware of his name.
Yeah, and Jonathan Gannon, the defensive coordinator who the Eagles have talked about, but certainly nothing's been announced yet with the coaching staff.
Again,
has a lot of
here's a guy in Jonathan Gannon whose name had come up in more than a few other potential landing spots as a guy who could go on and be a successful defensive coordinator. And the other name, and the other guy I'm anxious to see, and of course it's his first foray into the NFL, that is Brian Johnson, the quarterback coach, who had been at Utah, had come to the University of Florida, where he worked with Kyle Trask this past year as offensive coordinator, and now he comes in and he has a very good knowledge of Jalen Hurts, having known him since he was 4 years old.
So, Merrill, what happens here? We've got a month of, we're all sitting here wondering, and going to be a lot of tough roster decisions. We all know about the quarterback position. What other questions do you have about the roster between now and when March 17th arrives, the free agency period begins, and we get a real sense of the direction the Eagles are taking?
Well, obviously the most talked about issue, as you said, is the quarterback issue. So I won't belabor that point. I don't think there's anything more to be said about it until something happens one way or the other. But there are question marks. I mean, we saw Zach Ertz get very emotional right after the season and almost got the feeling that he may have played his last game as an Eagle. There are other guys who are going to be in that position. I can't imagine that somebody like Jason Peters is going to be back, even though he says he would like to be back. It appears that his time has finally come. Same with Deshaun Jackson, who we love. He's exciting. He's exhilarating. He's also absent most of the time because he is not durable at this stage of his career. So it wouldn't surprise me to see a roster this year with at least 20 new players.
20 new players. Let's see, 50. Merrill, that's a high percentage of. I mean, and I guess I agree certainly because the salary cap is going to be difficult to navigate, and Deshaun and Alshon Jeffrey, and I mean the safety position. Jalen Mills is a free agent.
That
Roger
sounds
McLeod
crazy,
is
doesn't it? That you're talking about that many players on a 53-man roster. But the fact of the matter is, I will bet you when all is said and done, and September whatever comes along, and the Eagles line up for the opening game, there are somewhere between 17 and 22 new players on this roster.
You're going to have a lot of new names to know if that's the case, Merrill.
Would you doubt it? Would that surprise you?
No, I mean, especially when it's interesting when you come back after a tough year, and I just think so much of this reminds me of 1999 and Andy Reid. I just feel like this young coach, we don't really know much about him. He's the first that we don't know a whole lot about in the Jeffrey Lurie tenure since Andy. We knew a lot about Chip. We obviously knew a lot about Doug. This is a young coach here in Nick Sirriani who has a bunch of work for a roster that is, as Jeffrey Lurie has said, a roster that's in transition.
Well, just remember that the single biggest thing that set the whole tone for Andy Reid's tenure, successful tenure as the Eagles head coach, was the very first player he picked in the draft, and that was Donovan McNabb. And that offense was built around Donovan McNabb, and Donovan led this team to 5 NFC championships and to a Super Bowl, where they ended up coming up short. But look at that record. Look at that record in those years under Donovan McNabb. It was great. I don't know that Mike Sirianni will have the personnel influence that Andy Reid had, but it is important that they come up with key players in this draft to get to get the Nick Sirianni era off on the right foot.
Merle, is there any other way the Eagles are going to go here? And they have to nail the draft, right? Like free agency, I just don't think that. I guess I go in without a lot of expectations. I feel the only way this team is going to be rebuilt here is through the draft. Do you agree with that?
I agree. First of all, they're not in a real good spot in terms of the salary cap to spend a lot of money on expensive free agents, and it's going to be through the draft. And they've got the 6th pick in this draft, and they've got to make that pick of somebody who will bring an immediate positive impact to this organization.
Well, Merrill, I guess until then, it's going to be kind of radio silence here for the next several weeks until March 17th. That's usually the way it works. It's always the most frustrating time of the year for me because we just don't hear from the Eagles as they plan their offseason strategy. And I want to know what this team's going to do. And I guess I just sense what you sense, a roster.
David, it's so hard to figure. It's so hard to figure out. I mean, we just saw something happen that is unthinkable. We saw the Rams trade Jared Goff, and to get rid of Jared Goff, they had to give up 2 first-round picks and a third-round pick. That Jared Goff to go to Detroit, he seemed like the throw-in in that deal. It's like you want 2 firsts and a third. If you do, you're going to have to take Jared Goff and give us Matthew Stafford. I mean, that's the way it is. I mean, it's crazy, but that set the tone for this whole offseason.
So the question is, because I know Eagles fans are out there wondering about Carson Wentz, and is Carson Wentz seen around the league as Jared Goff, or is he seen as Matthew Stafford?
There's the old saying, in the eyes of the beholder. Maybe Frank Reich sees him as the next Matthew Stafford. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. Merrill Reese, thank you so much once again, and enjoy the off season. I hope the snow melts in time for you to get your golf game going again.
Well, as I look out the front door, Dave, it's not going to be anytime soon.
Merrill, thanks so much.
Thank you, Dave.
As always, great stuff there from one of my idols, the great Merrill Reese. All right, Don Smolenski, team president. When the Eagles opened the NovaCare Complex 20 years ago, he wasn't the team president. Jeffrey Lurie had purchased the team in 1994-95. Joe Banner was the team president. And the Eagles were looking to move into the 21st century as a football organization. Veterans Stadium just wasn't cutting it. As both a training facility, the locker rooms were horrible, the playing surface atrocious. Hey, the people in the stands, all you who are out there, I know you had a great time. But the Eagles wanted to become a top-of-the-line NFL franchise. And to do so, they believed, getting a great training facility was one of the crown jewels. As I discussed last week with team president Don Smolenski, the NovaCare Complex, happy birthday, you're 20 years old. Don, the NovaCare Complex, and this is going to make certainly me feel old, is 20 years old. It's been an amazing journey, and
I guess what I'd like to say is back then, 20 years ago, what was your role? Peter Graves was the architect. We were coming out of Veterans Stadium. You were not the president of the team. What was your role in the NovaCare Complex, in the building of the NovaCare Complex?
Yes, 20 years ago, I was the chief financial officer. I think, I had joined the organization in December of 1998. I believe we signed John Runyon early in 1999, or was he in 2000?
He was when we broke ground with John Runyon as the kind of the guy.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So I came in, and then Dan McGregor was our director of facilities at the time, and he was working on that project, and I started working with him as we were, running financial projections for both NovaCare and, at the time, in anticipation of a new stadium. So, like everything at the Eagles, you jump in with 2 feet and you just start running.
I remember it's changed so much through the years. And the one area that is now where all the content people sit, where my office is, it used to be a mock suite where, if you kind of explain, we would bring in prospective suite holders, and they would walk through a suite with Merrill and the voice of the Eagles, the game sound, and kind of like give them the game experience of a suite. That's the original design, right?
Yeah, the front area was we turned that into a preview area once we moved into the NovaCare Complex. That was a preview area with, as you described, a mock suite, and it was set up to bring people through, show them the model of the stadium design and what it would envision, and then they stepped into that mock suite and could get their view of the field from different levels, and that was definitely an integral component for those first several years.
Don, what has the challenge been keeping it modernized, cutting edge, with all the football technology? At the same time, I mean, you have the actual numbers. How much larger has the organization gotten in the last 20 years to house that many people and to create space, and at the same time to keep it really cutting edge with all of the draft room that we've done and all the football operations areas that have been upgraded? The cafeteria has been remodeled many times. I mean, it's really, I would imagine that's been a great challenge for you.
Yeah, well, right, as you alluded to, right? Well, NovaCare Complex is our home, right? And that's how we feel when we walk in there, right? It's a special place. We feel it for those of us who were at the vet where we had no windows, and to come in to have all the natural light. It really is a home and has a very homey feel to it. And much like any home, we've remodeled it over the years. We've renovated it. We've been creative. We've converted closets into offices and other offices space into studios, and we've tried to use every nook and cranny to absorb the increase in our staffing. And I had these numbers, Dave, of how we've grown in 20 years, but I don't have them off the top of my head. But I think we've grown by more than 100 employees over time, and it's just been really incredible. I think we've kept it looking good, and I think we use it to impress free agents. I know the coaching staff, as I gave Nick and some of the guys a tour around the facility, they were very impressed, and it was very, very gratifying.
And I guess, Don, people have to understand that in the world of the NFL, there aren't a lot of teams that are actually housed in a city. So the footprint is, I guess, maybe, and I don't know this is not a knock or anything, it's modest by NFL terms. So, I mean, is that when you remember back to the first time you walked onto the grounds, what it used to be the old naval base, the ability to maximize space, pretty remarkable, right?
Yeah, we've existed in that same footprint. We're surrounded by incredible neighbors who've been we have a tremendous relationship with, and we started out without having training camp. Now we have training camp. We've been able to keep our facility state of the art and and comfortable for our players, so that they get the best treatment, the best access, so that they have the best working environment, so they can go out and perform on the field. And the NovaCare Complex, the training facility, was one of the pillars of our foundations for success. Right, franchise quarterback and state-of-the-art training facility, state-of-the-art stadium, head coach and player personnel department, and those were that Jeffrey had cited back then 20 years ago, which were the pillars for success. And 20 years later, NovaCare Complex stands as one that's still standing strong and providing that foundation for us to do what we need to do on the field.
Don, last one. What did it look like when the first time you walked on? I don't remember. It was just just the barracks there to the Patterson Avenue side, and then was there actually an existing building?
Yeah, the officers' quarters were still there, and actually I was just looking at some pictures. The Naval Hospital was still standing because that didn't get torn down till a later date. We didn't have the indoor facility right away. That got built a year or so later. We started construction on that, but otherwise it looks much the same, other than we did renovate those officers' quarters to bring those into modern times from the early years of the naval base. But for the structure itself, we've maintained the design, and we've just renovated the bones inside, and it's still a great atmosphere and a great place to go every day to work for the Eagles. And
we hope that we get to go back to work soon. Anything you'd like to say on that?
Yes.
Do we even know what the future holds yet?
The future is filled with hope, and hopefully everybody will get vaccinated, and we can be back together again, bring the family back together again, and and also bring our fans back together. So that's what keeps me motivated and inspired every day.
All right, everyone. I want to thank you again for joining us here on the Eagles Insider Podcast, presented by Lincoln Financial Group. If you have a moment to drop us a rating, we would appreciate it very much. They go a long way to get guests like Jeffrey Lurie and Don Smolenski and our quarterbacks and our great players and all of the cooperation from the top of the Philadelphia Eagles organization. So if you have a moment, click on the link in the details section of your podcast library and pass the word. The Eagles Insider Podcast, presented by Lincoln Financial Group, coming your way throughout this 2021 offseason. I'm Eagles Insider Dave Spadaro. Thanks to Peter Kelly, Trevor Hayes, and Ray Doyle for their help. Thanks to all of you for joining us once again here. I'll be back next week with a whole lot more on the Eagles Insider Podcast. Everyone, have yourselves a great Eagles day, and fly, Eagles, fly.
E-A-G-L-E-S, Eagles!
In just over 3 years, Eagles Autism Foundation has raised millions of dollars for autism research and care. But this is about so much more than just fundraising. This is about making a transformational difference in the lives of those affected by autism. This is about bringing our community together. With inclusive, sensory-friendly events and accessible resources, we meet families where they need us most and where we can serve them best. Together, we're united in our mission to improve the lives of the autism community and to turn awareness into action. It's what we focus on every day in every way.